Hello, everybody. This is Tobias speaking, Tobias Huber from Siemens, and I'd like to take you on a journey how to decarbonize real estate and building stock. So let me share my presentation with you. Here we go. So for the next 30 minutes, I'd like to take you on a journey. So how to decarbonize real estate. And we will look on it from engineering towards financing. And what has changed, I would say, over the last decade is that we no longer can distinguish buildings from the energy providing infrastructure. So whenever we talk decarbonization of buildings, we also talk having an energy transition in place that allows us to consume environmentally friendly produced energy. So let's briefly look on the market drivers. What are the market drivers? To be successful, I start from the left to the right. The ideal foundation is to have a deregulated energy market that allows private sector to tap in and to contribute towards an energy transition and change. In order to have, let's say, every participant in these markets being confident about what they're doing and where they invest, a regulatory compliance is important, a regulatory framework that should be given. So it's good to have it. Let's go on the right side. That's more the private sector, but also, no, it's not right. It's also the public sector when you talk cities, municipalities, and so on. So there are more and more objectives set up, commitments given to achieve net zero or to have any other ESG metrics applied and committed to. So when you talk large corporates, they all have their sustainability goals, they have their carbon neutrality goals. And on the other side, we have the institutional investors. They are more and more looking on the impact of their investments. They no longer look just on risk and return. They look on risk, return, and the impact they can make with their investments. So we see a lot of shift in terms of their portfolio towards environmentally friendly technologies and projects. And last but not least, there's the society. I mean, in the past, large corporates did not care so much about the opinion of the society, but now with movements like Fridays for Future, Greta Thunberg, Greenpeace and others, there is much more attention to it and about the reputational risk that one can have if he does not feel comfortable with what he is doing on this planet. And then underlying on that, on the bottom of this slide, it's the technology and the innovation, and make innovation scalable so that the prices come down, like we see it with photovoltaics. Photovoltaics is no longer luxury, and we will see the same, for instance, with electrical storage solutions in the near future, or e-vehicles and e-vehicle charging. A good way to look on how to get towards net zero is to take the 3Ds. Decentralization, digitalization, and decarbonization. Decentralization, this is pretty much tied to that more and more we see power generated locally, power generated and distributed via networks from consumers to producers, or being both. So buildings nowadays become prosumers. If a building has, for instance, photovoltaics installed, a campus has a microgrid in place, then these buildings produce energy and they consume energy and they need to be connected. Digitalization is the glue. Digitalization makes it happen that we can connect all the energy streams, that we can get all the data out of buildings, that we can have a better performance of the technical assets in buildings and the underlying systems available. And then on the right, yeah, when we talk decarbonization of real estate, decarbonization of buildings in particular, it's not so much anymore about the electrical piece. We know in theory how to do it. The really big challenge comes to the thermal energy that's used, how to get the thermal energy eliminated and enhancing electrification of buildings overall. So where to start the energy transition? Let's look on where the global greenhouse gas emissions come from. And you see industry is ahead, some industries in particular, then transport and buildings. And it's somehow connected. So if you look on the industry, you have cement. You need the cement for the buildings. Then you have transportation. You need to transport goods to buildings. you need to have e-vehicle charging infrastructure in buildings or at buildings to enable a transition into e-vehicles. So it's not the one or the other. There is a ecosystem and a connectivity and interoperability between those emissions. So 3 examples how Siemens addresses greenhouse gas emissions sectors. So industries, buildings, and transport, for instance. And I just highlight the green ones here, not to go into much detail. The industry has recognized their resources are finite, but data is infinite. So let's make more use about the data. And yeah, we need to have a greater transparency on the carbon footprint of all products and materials that are used in the entire supply chain from the beginning, from each and every individual supplier. Then you have the buildings. They become decentralized, decarbonized, and digital. So we need to have decarbonization programs for a fleet of buildings and not just look on individual single buildings. It has to be a programmatic approach. And the right-hand side, when you look transportation, okay, I talked already about e-vehicle charging and the charging infrastructure that's needed, but also mass transportation like trains, hydrogen trains. We have a second generation of hydrogen trains already available. So that will be probably one of the next big things. Then let's look on how a decarbonization roadmap could look like and what the levers are. That's what I promised you in the beginning. Let's say the strategic approach when we go from the left to the right. So first of all, you need to align what are the commitments you made, what are the targets and the goals that you want to achieve. And then you need to understand how do you achieve that. So where in your company, for instance, let's stay with this example here, CO2 or CO2 intensity, where do you have not just the CO2 emissions, but also the CO2 intensity? Then you can identify those hotspots that you need to work on. And then you need to plot a long-term plan, identify the levers for success, have a first simulation, do forecast the future emissions with and without those measures. And then you need to implement, then you need to execute. Yeah, so you need to have really an implementation plan. You need to have the financial resources available or funding mechanism, and then go into technology. So what kind of levers I'm talking about? Let's go through it one by one. The first lever is reduce the energy consumption, in particular in buildings. The energy you reduce upfront is the energy you do no longer need to produce. So the second lever is get independent from the large energy supplier by producing energy on site as close as you can. Third lever will be the transition to electrification. We need to electrify our buildings. Fourth lever is then, once you have done those physical measures on your site, on your campus, with your buildings, then it's about procuring clean energy, green electricity that's needed. And if it's not working out properly and you have some rest left open, then it's about offsetting the remaining carbon for sure. Lever 1, reduction of energy consumption. In a building could be done, for instance, by control systems and building automation, by optimization of heating, ventilation, and air conditioning, and better maintenance and commissioning. Then also optimizing processes. So when you produce heat for industrial premises, for instance, how do you capture the heat? How do you build a heat recovery system in place? How do you optimize your chillers? And for sure, as the latest and greatest technology can help by just exchanging a boiler, a chiller, a lighting system, and so on and so on. Lever 2, physical reduction of consumption, but also the on-site generation. So I have it still here on the left-hand side on my list, the combined heat and power plant. We all know that still you use usually natural gas or a combination of in such a CHP installation. I would see it as still as a bridge technology where it's allowed and applicable, where you have the demand also for the heat that needs to be somehow generated, even if on the long run, also here we want to get out of the fossil fuels. But maybe as a bridging technology, it can help us at least for a few more years to come. Then the on-site solar photovoltaic usage We have so many rooftops. Before we go into greenfield, let's utilize the rooftops we have and install photovoltaic systems all over. Yeah? And then more or less, the more we depend on renewables, the more we have fluctuation in the energy supply because of the availability of sun, the availability of wind, and so on. Yeah, we need to have storage solution. Not just electrical storage for electricity, as a thermal storage for heat and cold. And then, yeah, all over, whenever you can bring together a few potential buildings or a larger campus, then a microgrid that has a grid connection, that's probably a good solution where you run your own microgrid and manage the energy flows. Lever 3, decarbonization of the fleet, of the charging infrastructure, electrification of buildings. So really have a transformation from fossil fuel consuming assets towards electric driven technology. And here's one example which I see having a bright future: the use of heat pumps. We need to make use of heat pumps that take out heat in the conversion process. Lever 4, procurement of green electricity, green energy overall. Yeah, that's something we all need to work together. The consumers and the producers of energy, the large utility companies, the small local distributors, municipalities. We need to have a more standardized process in place for power purchase agreements, and so that there are more alternative and emerging fuel options available. So in particular, hydrogen. Renewable natural gas will be difficult to produce in the amount needed. But hydrogen, I think overall, the green hydrogen production in certain countries where the, let's say, incentive schemes are in place, that's already a valid way to look forward. So that's lever 4. Now to lever 5, filling the gaps could be with purchase of renewable energy certificates, trading of those gas certificates, and so on. And last not least, for sure, carbon offsets with investments in certain projects like forestation and so on and so on. But for me, that's just for the last mile if you cannot achieve your net zero, and it's something you need to compensate. Yeah, I said it already, buildings become prosumers, producing and consuming energy. On the left side here, you see the past, how traditionally power grids have been working. Large power plants, coal-fired, nuclear-powered, and so on and so on. High voltage, medium voltage line, and then towards the consumer, residential, commercial, and industrial customers. That was central in one way. Now we are in an ecosystem. Let's call it the energy cloud, because you need to be digitally connected. Now you have wind farm, you have electrical storage solutions, you have rooftop solar, you have electric vehicles. We see more and more electric vehicle is a mobile electrical storage solution. And the first cars come to the market where you not just can charge your car, you also can use your car and power other electrical assets with it. And so you see, complexity is rising, everything is connected, and that's the only way to manage those systems and platforms and data exchanges is by having the energy cloud. Let's call it the energy cloud with many ecosystem partners in an open ecosystem. Yeah, and where is that place where this energy transition takes place and where the buildings are connected to? That's what we call the grid edge. The grid edge is, let's say, the thin line between the supply side and the demand side. On the supply side, going from the left to the right, we will still have those central energy supply with large power plants. We need to have energy resilience. We need to compensate fluctuations from renewable energy and so on. So that has to be an energy market, and the energy market has to be open to as many as possible market participants. Then you have on-site energy supply. Yeah, that can be wind, PV, hydrogen, microgrids, battery storage, as said before. And then how do you optimally use the energy? Yeah, the energy use and the thermal storage and the local control systems, and then the connections again from the building to the mobility aspect. So you see from the left to the right, you have energy production, even with a central energy supply, you have the consumer, with which are the buildings, but then it's also like there has to be e-vehicle charging infrastructure tied to the buildings, because people come to the building and go. So at the end, that's a larger ecosystem, which we call the grid edge. So what kind of energy solutions do you see? Wow, that's massive. So I don't want to run you through all of them, but just highlight a few of them. So here on the left, on the bottom, hydrogen, the production of green hydrogen, that is definitely something that really could work out in a larger ecosystem as a storage solution, as a fuel replacement, and bringing together consumers and producers at the same time at one place. Then power to X. So whenever you have generated power, but actually you cannot use it, there are multiple ways that you could use the power in conversion systems. And then the third one I would like to highlight here is the digital twin. We need to get better in forecasting, in simulation, in seeing whatever we change in a larger ecosystem, what is the impact, what happens, which risks are there? So how can we better manage risks that come out of participation in an energy market and having a higher flexibility in these markets? So those are three aspects: hydrogen, power to X, digital twin, which I think is something worthwhile to monitor and track how innovations take place and which countries pick up first, and which use cases have been realized and so on. That's the energy solutions. So now it's all about money. I mean, many of the solutions you have seen on the slides, maybe you think it's boring because it's not so brand new. We have the solutions available, they are there, and we do not see sufficient movement. We do not really see that this energy transition and the net zero solutions take the pace they would need to all achieve our goals by 2030 and onwards. So what kind of solutions are there in the market? Let's go from the left to the right. That's the left one is a typical case. There's a customer and he finances the project. So he uses his CapEx. So he pays it by himself, usually in a milestone payment, how projects are implemented. We see more and more shrinking demand for that because it's very simple. Usually, no matter if you talk private or public sector, but be precise, take a vertical market, take an automotive company. The target of an automotive company or the business purpose of an automotive company is to produce cars, okay? So they do not want to spend their money on energy providing infrastructure or just energy efficient buildings. So that's a non-core asset to them. So they seek someone to finance it because they will not, or they even are not able, I don't want to say willing, they are not able to spend and justify CapEx on those measures that are non-core business. So a model that has been established over the last 10 to 20 years, pretty much established in the market, is the ESCO models or energy service companies business, where you have an energy performance contract. I come to that in more detail on the next slide. The good thing here is this is why customers like it, because the savings are greater than the payments, so it's cash flow positive, and there's a performance guarantee for the energy savings in place. When we talk energy savings, this is where the model came from, energy performance contracting. Now this is more and more translated into CO2. So CO2 is the new currency, and this is where new guarantees take place, less on the energy cost side or energy consumption side, more on the impact in the reduction of the CO2 emissions. So let's go further to the right. Last on this page is energy as a service, a managed service agreement. This is what actually everyone is seeking for. Again, savings are larger and greater than payments. It's cash flow positive. It's an X as a service contract. A transfer of ownership is possible. So that's something customers like to have more in place. They do not want to pay for those assets. They also do not want to have those assets sitting on their balance sheet. So, but what's the negative side? It's pretty difficult to set up those as a service agreements, and yeah, you need to spend a lot of brainworks and financial solutions for that. So I told you that I will go more into detail about those solutions. Here on the bottom, the green box, green boxes you see again, that's the energy performance contracting, energy as a service, power purchase agreements, and then on the last stage, it's about design, build, own, operate, and maintain. This is when a customer does not want to deal with any kind of energy producing asset. Then companies like Siemens or others, they can take the design phase, they build it, they own it, they operate it, and they maintain it. So we see contracts in the market, they go up to 30, 35 years, where customers said, okay, I don't want to deal with those non-core business where I have no expertise, no competency, and no larger interest. Among all of them, the basic principle is you have an energy cost baseline, you do an energy audit, an investment grade audit, you reduce the energy consumption from the day of implementation, and then you have recurring energy cost reductions and savings. And you use those savings to finance the investments until the end of the contractual period. And during that time, ESCO companies like Siemens, they guarantee those savings or reductions in CO2 emissions, so that a customer who has not all the expertise in-house can be confident that targets will be achieved. So now the question, is that enough? We have that in place. As I said, the challenge here is that you have often a lot of financial paperwork to do. Yeah, you need to set up special purpose vehicle companies. You need to have a lot of contractual work to be done with power purchase agreements, with energy as a service agreements. You need to have financing parties involved that take over the assets. So you have a transfer of assets. It's all pretty complicated. So that's why we're looking for some more disruptive financial innovations right now. So that's the next big thing, hopefully, in the market, where we are seeking for a proof of concept at the moment. Imagine that there is a blockchain-enabled marketplace, yeah, and you take those physically fixed assets, yeah, physically fixed assets like buildings, like wind farms, like PV installations. They are time-consuming in acquisition. They are under geographical boundaries, and for an investor, it's difficult to exit those investments. And nowadays, with crypto tokens, I'm not talking cryptocurrencies like Bitcoins, don't mix that up. I'm talking token solutions where you have a smart contract tied to a token, and where the token is backed by a real asset. Yeah, so there's a way you can tokenize those physically fixed assets and make them liquid, make them tradable, so that over time, if there's more demand for energy efficiency and sustainable technologies and products and solutions, you can increase the asset value of that. And for the investor who is also looking on impact, risk, return, and impact, yeah, is optimized. So you see the three benefits out of that: global access for investors to our Siemens project that have an ESG impact, connecting Siemens customers with the investors market directly. And then at the end, we increase liquidity by converting those assets into tokens. So still you need to do the paperwork and the contractual things and the due diligence. You need to do it, but you need to do it only one time. And then in the following trades, you can always rely on those existing contracts, and the baseline as well as the savings and the improvements are all stored safely and without any ability to manipulate on the blockchain in the token. Yeah, what about Siemens? Last not least, talking good, doing good? Question mark. I think so. I mean, we are part of the World Green Building Council, like myself, representing Siemens and the industry in the board. We are committed to the SBTi targets. We follow all the UN standards. And we were the first large company that has ESG targets for the company tied to the incentive plan of the senior management. So that means senior management needs to achieve sustainability KPIs in order to get their incentive. Okay. And then I think we are impactful. We have an own carbon neutral program in the company. We have reduced 54% of our CO2 emissions. And I'm personally responsible to get those CO2 footprint for real estate measured, monitored in an audit-proof way, and also to decarbonize all our facilities. Yeah. For sure, SDG is the foundation of all our activities. That's the metrics, the underlying metrics that we use. And yeah, that's our internal view. On the right side, you see, yeah, we are also recognized by the official ratings, in particular the Dow Jones Sustainability Index. It's one that we are leading for multiple years. And this is how I would like to say thank you. And was a pleasure for me to join this 24 hours. And thank you very much.